Namaskara, good evening, and welcome to today's BIC Streams session, Redefining Masculinity. Parenting tips for raising gender equitable boys. Boys will be boys is an adage that is often used to pass off lewd and discriminatory behavior towards women and girls. The underlying premise is that boys are hardwired in this way and the course of nature cannot be altered, so one has to accept that boys will always be discriminatory towards women and girls. This reasoning is not only deterministic and flawed, as it completely negates the role of socialization in this process, it is also very detrimental to society at large. So, this panel discussion today, we would like to tease apart the role that patriarchal gender norms play in how boys are raised, the role that parents can play to counter these norms, and raise their boys to behave and act in ways that promote gender equality and nonviolence. This session is in collaboration with Project RAISE and Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. On our panel today, we have Sujata Khandekar, Founding Director and Secretary, Coro India, Vivek Varma, coach, mentor, investor, and philanthropist, Parmesh Shahani, author of Queeristan, and this panel is moderated by Anusha Bharadwaj, founder, director, Soch for Change, for social change. Full bios of all the speakers will appear in the chat box that is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you have any questions, comments, or observations to share, please feel free to use the Q&A box that is also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Anusha.
Thanks, Geeta, for those great introductions and also for starting with saying boys will be boys. And it's an honor to be on this panel with such amazing panelists and with BIC. Thank you for hosting this amazing event. But more than anything, being a moderator on this panel, I'm actually curious as a parent. I have two children. And I realized that no matter how much I would like to be a large influence in their life, I don't really have such a big role. They're learning things like a sponge from everywhere. And this realization sort of sunk in when my son was 2.5 years old, because I thought, we are the world, we are in a gender neutral home, and my partner sharing all this amazing household work and childcare, and he comes to the Voice for Girls office, so he's seen powerhouse of women. But he asked my husband, who was sporting long hair, that why are you tying your hair like a girl? And we were quite shocked because he's always seen me with short hair. And I think only on reflection we realized that he sees women wear hair any which way, but all the men in his life are only having short hair. And that's what we realized. Well, we are not going to be able to teach our children much, and we really as parents need to see where all are they learning from and be that sounding board for them. So I'm interested to see where this panel is going. But also, I think, when we think about, boys and talking to boys about gender, it's a whole new, different template that, we have to use. Voice for Girls has worked with girls, and we realized that that conversation is difficult, but so beautifully empowering for all of us. But when we started working with the boys and say, hey, let's talk about gender, we realized there's a lot that we need to learn. So my first question actually goes to Sujata ji, who, from Coro, you have been one of the forerunners in bringing men into the conversation on gender. So my question really is to say, what brought you to saying that, it was quite radical when you thought, let's bring women and men, or only men, into this conversation. And why was it important to take that decision, and how did it all come about?
Oh, yeah. So I'm also like you, wearing two hats. One is the founder of Coro, the organization, which was kind of forerunner in working with men and boys. And also when I started working with boys and men and boys, I was also, I have a son who was in his growing up age, he was 16 years old. So I had that opportunity to see my professional work and my personal domain, how they interact with each other, and how I jump into different domains, one after the other. So coming back to your question, why we decided to work with men and boys. So primarily we were working extensively and intensively on violence against women. You know? And like many other organizations, we were also focused on working with women and making them aware of their rights, gender rights, etc., and how do they fight violence that is being perpetrated on them, etc. But actually, the observation was the more women break culture of silence, the more they become vocal, the backlash also increase. The violence against them also increase. So actually, while looking at what causes this backlash increase, because then we realize that we are talking to only one segment of the whole dynamic, whereas we are leaving the other segment, which often is kind of perpetrator, perpetrator of violence against women, but we are not really educating them about their role, about equality, about values like social justice, equality, etc. So we wanted to work with men, but didn't know how to work with men and what to talk to them, And then there was an opportunity with Population Council, which in collaboration with them, we did an action research, which was about understanding construction of masculinities amongst young men in low-income communities of Mumbai. So that was the title of the action research. Actually, that gave us window to see what goes on in the minds of young boys, what they call violence. As you just said, where do they get all their inputs from about the construct around gender, construct around violence? How does that get manifested into their behavior, into their action? And are there any spaces for negotiation? Are there any spaces that we can really claim, we can get those spaces to make them reflect on that? So that window was opened to us by this research. And what was the finding of the research? I'll just quickly go. I mean, the research told us that there is no single construct of masculinity. Instead, it's a construct of masculinities, and at the continuum, at one end of the continuum is macho man. At the other end of the continuum is feminine man, kind of thing. And that's the continuum, and it's construct of masculinity. So that was one observation from the research. Second was, we realized that young men didn't see violence that they were perpetrating, whether physical, mental, coercion, etc. They didn't see that as violence. They saw it as a norm, kind of thing. They thought, and complementing socialization, we saw that when men think that girls should be beaten or women should be beaten, women also think that men can beat them because they love them. So there was kind of complementing socialization in this. What was important lesson from this, actually, we learned that the construct about masculinity gets imbibed through what they see, what they observe, what they hear, what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do, what they're appreciated for, or what they are ridiculed or punished for. So all these things actually they get into. And you just rightly said, when your son said, why are you having hair like a woman? Where did he get it from? So it's the environment. What are the locations? So the locations were family, peers, communities, media. Media was another very important location for this. And we realized that all attitudes are so constructed. I mean, it's not normal. They're all socially constructed. And that's why we realized that actually working with men and boys, also working with women and girls to some extent, is about erasing consciousness and not raising consciousness. Actually, the consciousness that has got built through our practices, norms, etc. How do we erase that? And how do we make that slate clear? That was a challenge we thought. And the more... we also realize that what men understand, what boys understand about themselves is all informed by what people near them tell about them, like as somebody calls significant others. So your family members, your community members, your peers, etc. So what they tell you actually makes a lot of difference, and that constructs their kind of identity, their being that gets constructed through this. And then we thought that actually this provided us, this was very important. And we thought that actually Men are part of problem, yes, when we are we are considering and thinking about violence against women, but they are also part of solution. So we have to bring them as partners on the table, negotiate with them, and actually discuss this freely and frankly, and see what are the spaces for reflection. So that's why we thought it was important.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the context. I also like that you said we are using our children as social experiments. I think that's where we learn how to unlearn so many of these things. Also, I think you brought up a very important point, the role of media. In fact, when we did our first foray into working with the boys through Voice for Girls, everybody said Voice for Girls, just stick to the girls. And we realized that it was not enough. And our first conversation with the boys was like, and a very simple question, ki pyar kaise hota hai? And all of them, including the girls, said, well, the boy has to come, follow me and pull my dupatta and throw number or keep calling and harassing me. And that's how love happens. So it was really important to say, well, we need to unlearn so many of these things that we are learning from everywhere. So thanks for that. But I think before any of this really comes into play, each of us in our life have a gender ball movement. That's the first time we realize, oh, actually, am I a boy? Am I a girl? And the world just looks at us at that binary. So to my listeners here, I'm like, going to ask you to reflect, through the conversation that we're going to have. What was your gender ball moment? But this leads me to Parmesh, and my question to you is, what was your first gender ball moment, Parmesh, and what aspects of your own journey and the role your parents played in like having you explain what that is and emulate or change?
Thank you, Anusha, for that. And Sujata, listening to you talk about the research and the impact of media makes me think once again why films like Kabir Singh are such a hit in our country. And I was also reflecting on a film that a friend of mine made many years ago called Mardistan, which played on Doordarshan, which was about toxic masculinity in Punjab and how it regenerates itself exactly through media representation, family, friends. So Anusha, it's not just, boys, but I think it's also the parents we need to think about how we parent boys in the same way that we've been thinking about how we parent girls. And Sujata, how do we erase consciousness of what good parenting needs to be for parents of boys as well as that of girls. And my own journey of gender and sexuality have actually been very linked. I grew up being very comfortable in being very what society would consider feminine and displaying very comfortably, again, behaviors that my friends and other people thought were feminine, but to me, which I thought were absolutely natural. And in my own family, which my mom thought were, wonderful, and which my dad, I think, was a little uncomfortable with it. And it's interesting, though. I remember one specific instance that I was 7, and I really, really, really wanted a Barbie doll. And it's interesting that we went to this shop, and of course, my father was like, they had this whole argument, and my father was like, no son of mine is going to get a Barbie doll, and my mother's like, he wants it, and of course, most parents tend to like have these conversations in front of you, imagining that you're not listening, right? It's something Indian parents you really need to work on. But what was interesting was my father's response, who said, well, if you have to buy a Barbie doll, at least buy a Ken doll as well. And that was very, and of course, kids go home and kids undress their Barbies the moment they get back home. At least that's what I did. And I was like, what? At least on the Barbies, they didn't look that different. So I actually think when people ask me, when did you first know you were gay? I mean, I think it's that moment that I tell my dad, thank you for getting me that Ken doll. No, just kidding. I think when I look back, I haven't been scarred as badly as so many other men have, because I've always had people in my court, right? Who've always been, including friends, who've always been able to take on the bullies. And there have been many bullies. But so it's been more consciousness of gender as well as sexuality in my case. And either through my clothes that I've always chosen to wear or in my behavior. And I see this with straight people as well, with straight kids as well who are growing up, who want to not conform, either in the way they dress, in the way they talk, in the way they display exuberance, for example. So just like, with my own queerness, I've seen kids struggle, and they continue struggling as adults, and the kind of harm they do to other people in their life because they've not resolved it is tremendous, right? And I just wish that while growing up, I had, better support systems than the ones that I did. So a lot of the research says that media is so important. Sujata couldn't agree more. And what's amazing right now is that there is so much media, say for queer kids growing up. And I'm actually taken the liberty to bring some wonderful storybooks. These are just 3 that have come out this year. The Boy in the Cupboard, which is wonderful by Gacy. There is Gutli Has Wings again, which is a wonderful Tulika book about a gender non-conforming boy, right? I'm a gender non-conforming child, actually.
Yeah.
And The Big Thoughts of Little Love, which Karan Johar has written as well, to popularize what good parenting is, as well as that you have to accept, your children for there. And there's like teenage books. This just came out, Big Mistake again. So there's so much stuff right now that kind of excites me. Whether it's books, whether it's films like Ek Ladki Ko Dekha or Shubh Mangal Jada, or Kannada web series like The Other Love Stories, which talks about lesbian love, or now films that show kids accepting their queer parents, like Super Deluxe or Dear Dad, right? So there's so much now conversation in the media that is kind of helping shift the narrative in terms of what is good parenting, how love needs to actually transcend societal barriers and expectations. And I just see so many, in my case, I see so many queer kids today who have so much more confidence because they have access to this material. They have access to support groups and communities, and they become so much more comfortable with themselves earlier than people like me, who I'm in my mid-40s and I'm still processing and struggling through a lot of this. If I have time, I want to actually read out an excerpt of a couple of lines from my book, in which I talk and I fill Queeristan with positive stories of just amazing accepting parents. Because when people think about queer lives, people think of it as narratives of just, it must have been so hard, you must have struggled, you must have suffered so much, and your parents must have thrown you out. That might be happening, but I think we also need to now showcase, role model, other kinds of narratives which are also happening. So if it's okay, can I just read out some lines from one of these?
Yes.
Great. So this is, I'm actually talking about, it's a chapter which I've called It's All About Loving Your Children, as a homage to Karan Johar's Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum. The tagline of that was, it's all about loving your parents. I'm like, no, it's actually all about loving your children. And I'm talking about this particular episode of Satyamev Jayate, which to me is landmark because it opened the doors in our country for parents actually starting to accept their queer children because of media. Because you have a popular star like Amir Khan, who invites parents like that of Ghazal, which I'm going to just read out right now, right? So this is an episode in which Amir explains to his audience that Ghazal Dhaliwal, seated next to him in a gorgeous green salwar kameez, was born male. Ghazal's story is one of both deep pain and great success. Having to live in a boy's body she did not identify with, she attempted to run away from home and changed her career and gender. But today she tells Amir she is at peace. Much of it comes from her family's ability to accept her identity. Amir introduces her parents and brings them on stage, calling them the heroes of the story. When Ghazal first opened up to her parents about how she felt, they did not resist, and they definitely did not chastise or punish her. They simply gave it time. When she ran away from home, they pleaded with her to come back, promising that they wouldn't scold her. When she showed them a film on gender identity that she had made while studying filmmaking, they asked her when she intended to transition. They recognized that post-surgery, she could look like a woman and not just feel like one trapped in a different body. Can you imagine yourself going to each and every house in your neighborhood, telling your community that the son that you have loved is now going to be your daughter, and that you love her still, if not more, and to accept her for who she is? Well, that is what Ghazal's parents did. those who love you, your parents, your friends, they will keep on loving you. We love you just as much. Rather, we love you more because we know you are happy now, is what one of Ghazal's relatives tell her, tearing up on screen. So I just want to read that excerpt because this is also what is happening in our country. So I think we need to showcase more these narratives out there, that there are ways of accepting your children which are wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Parmesh, and also for pushing the time on that. But I think it was so wonderful to listen to Ghazal's story. But also, I think you made a really important point that, everything starts very early on. I mean, I hate going shopping with my kids because the first question they'll ask is ladka ke liye chahiye, ladki ke liye chahiye. Do you want it for the boy or a girl? And throughout, my boy would go for the sparkling, fancy stuff, and it will always be of the girls. And we just didn't mind buying it. But I think he is learning, saying, no, I don't want that, which I think is so unfortunate because the dazzly stuff looks great on him. But thank you for bringing that to us. To all our listeners, please start populating the Q&A as and when you're listening to the speakers, because they're making some amazing points. And this points me to Vivek, one of the most inspiring people I've met. If you've not read his story, please go and Google him up. He's quite famous, Vivek Verma. And not just that, his, the inspiring thing about him that I always take away is how he fought the legal system in our country to adopt 2 girls. But my question to you today is, how do you see yourself as a man in a world where, they are not really known to want to empower other women and give the baton to women? Vivek, I know that you're in all the roles you play, you're always keeping women in the center of these conversations. And as a man, how do you do that? And how do you make those decisions?
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words, Anusha. And yes, God has been great. Life has been good. So thank you for those kind words. And coming to your question, I think, it starts early. And I think for me, a lot of this empowerment and all of these fancy words we use today started when I was a small kid and when I saw my mother, and I saw her as a very, very powerful character, as one would describe, very independent, someone who's kind of, made up her mind, will do things independently, stand her opinion, deal with people. So all of those things that we generally, when I look back now, when I became more wise, we don't associate with a woman. These are characters which are associated largely in our stereotyped world with men, and I've had the good fortune of kind of being raised by a mother. She's no more now, but I owe a lot of what I am today to her. So I think to me, it all starts from there. It starts from, as the cliche goes, it all starts from home. So how do we really simplify these, big concepts? How do we look at that? So my journey started with my mother. Fortunately, when I entered the professional world, my first boss in life was a lady boss. And that again kind of gave a very different perspective, for me, because again, the stereotype then kept saying that, oh, you report to a lady, and all of that, the way the world looks up to things, but I saw a very different perspective in the lady I was reporting to. So a lot of lessons that I learned from there early on in life. So I think for me, it all starts from home. How do we really look at what we do with people at home? What are we seeing around us? And I think I've had the good fortune, and I want to carry that forward. And I think the story you talked about was also that, I went through a tough phase where I actually lost my first wife to a long battle of cancer. And then, during that course, I chose to adopt children. I adopted the first child, which was a girl. I went to adopt the second child. I had no bias in my mind, and I was open to, a child of any sex. And, I'm talking about 2000, early 2000. So at that time, gender only meant binary. The lot of developments happened much later. So at that stage, it was, I was open to either of the two. And the adoption center only showed me only showed me boys. And I said, why are you doing that? Why is this bias? And then they told me there is a law which prevents any parent to adopt a second child of the same sex, whether the first one was adopted or naturally born. And hence, because we know your elder daughter is from our adoption center, so we know you have a girl already. So we were not showing you girls because you can't adopt. So no point. And I said, no, now I have made the decision. I hadn't made it so far, but now that you've explained this to me, I will take a girl home. And they said, sure, you can, but you will be a guardian for life. You will never be an adopted father. But you are happy to take. You will be a guardian, and I did that, and along with a few other parents, went to court. A long 3-year battle. The Hindu Adoption Act needed to be changed, and I'm glad it got changed. And I'm very glad because these girls have really made a fantastic difference to our lives. Both these girls, the elder one is now 21, the younger one is 15, and they've made a phenomenal difference to our lives. And then I chose to move on, got remarried. So I've had women play a very important role in my life, and I think it's important that even in my current journey as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as a mentor, I end up spending a lot of time working with women, because my own personal belief, thanks to my mother, thanks to my first boss, thanks to a lot of ladies, is that women are naturally far superior managers than men are. And I know a lot of men may not fully agree with me, but that's my firm belief, because that's even in the stereotyped nature of our earlier belief that a woman will do multitasking, that is a managerial quality that our women have. So I think in that sense, I've been someone who believes that, and I work with a lot of people. In my role as a board member of TAI, I drive a lot of TAI initiatives with women entrepreneurs. My wife runs a social impact organization which is focused on women in domestic abuse, and now it's moved to anybody in domestic abuse, invisible scars. I run a not-for-profit society where one of the founders is a lady who's working on water initiatives. So multiple roles that I play, I think, is a fantastic thing. And just coming back to working with people at home, my daughters have kind of brought up in a sense where it's a continuum. So it's not a binary world, it's a continuum. And I'm very proud, and Parmesh talked about books and the role it plays, and I'm very glad that my younger girl, who's now 15, but a couple of years ago, maybe about 4 years ago, decided to pick an interest in becoming an ally to the LGBTQ community. And she is today ranked as the youngest ally in the city of Hyderabad, and very recently has co-authored a book along with 40 other people. And this was released by the Friends of the Queer World. And the book is called Equally. And as you may probably see, the title, it's equally, equal ally, essentially. And she's one of these authors, only 2 children who's talked about it. So I'm very happy in that sense that, I'm playing a role in establishing that I think it has to become gender neutral. And I think to some extent, I also feel our own conversations need to change.
Yeah.
When we talk about this gender, we always talk about this men versus women. And I think we have to move those conversations away to the fact that it's a continuum. So you may be like, you look at autism, like you look at many other things in life. I think this is also a continuum. You may be anywhere. And I have learned so much from my younger daughter, Mishka. And as I understand now, I believe there are over 30 different gender types that one can look at, and coming from 40 years ago when I was growing up, you only knew 2, and so the world has progressed, and we have to change our conversation. So thank you, Anusha, for that lovely question. And
Thanks, Vivek. And it goes back to, the personal is political. A lot of our work is, or our life we see from those lens. So again, I'm asking the audience to really look at all these conversations on gender that you've personally faced, and how that has sort of been a pivot for you in your life. But also, I think, Vivek, you brought up a very important point that, when we associate everything that's weak with a girl, so run like a girl is actually not really, play like a girl. And how we really need to change the idea of such things, and how, it's just run and play. And it's not like a girl or like a boy, right? But it's a upward battle for sure. I'm pulling back to Sujata ji and saying, okay, going back to, these conversations that have to happen with the boys, it's really important. But from when you started to now, have the conversations changed? That's one of the first questions. And what should we be aware of when we're talking to boys? I know that you've already said it's a reflection. It's so different from our conversation on empowerment.
Correct.
It's a reflective piece that you have to do with the boys. And the tougher question really to you is, as parents, can we actually raise gender equitable boys? And I'm really putting it to say that it's a long journey, and as a parent of a boy, the road is really long and tiring ahead. So over to you, Sujata ji.
Yeah, no, absolutely, it's a journey, kind of. And so what is different when you speak with boys, as parents, and speak with girls? Actually, it is all about understanding the power dynamic and power relationship. Generally, the general perception of the society is, if women get empowered, men lose. So it is always seen as gain and lose, kind of zero sum. So actually communicating that it's not zero sum. There's something that's so important and very tricky also. Like, we don't have those tools handy. Like, how do you communicate that? But I should give you an example. One of my colleagues, so when we were discussing, he was part of this masculinity research, etc. And that had impacted personally to the entire team, So constantly they were questioning their own behavior in their relationships with mother, sisters, wives, etc., etc. And they said that was quite tiring, because every time you have to be really careful whether you are encouraging, etc. And when we said what actually motivated him, to be a human person, to be a compassionate man, kind of thing, and respect his wife, etc. So he was saying, actually, I have grown up in the family where constantly he was scared of his father, because of the violence that was happening in their family, etc. And he always saw scare in his mother's eyes. And he says, when now I see respect and love in my wife's eyes, I feel satisfied. That actually motivates me to this. And I think, but this is completely, a different kind of framework than what we are brought up in, both as girls and as boys together. Because we are always, how we are told about, while parenting, we must see how we manifest the compassion, the love, the relationship beyond transactional, equality, respect, dignity, all this. How do we communicate to our children in that? Because even if we are saying that we are equal, but always pressurizing them to be first in the class or something, and always chase that transactional this thing, and be on the top of it at any cost. So actually, that is also very masculine kind of concept. That is also where bringing up children with not with the parity and equality kind of notion. So how do we do that? And I think dialogues are so important. And dialogues, not for the sake of dialogues, actually, whether the dialogues would make them reflect on their behavior and giving them space to what that I'm telling you from my own experience. Like, at one point of time, I was so sure that under the sky, anything could happen. And my son, I would be the first to whom my son would tell that, so that kind of confidence, giving that space. And actually, I have also learned lessons, kind of. And as you said, it's a big journey. Even today, I don't think there is anybody like gender expert or does everything so neatly and perfectly. We are all learning. So we fumble at times. And I think we should not be judgmental about ourselves also. The fact that we realize that we have done something wrong, or maybe we need to reflect, that itself shows that how sensitive we are towards the gender biases that the society has. Because that realization is there. And we don't slip into the justification more. Like I did this because of this, I wanted to do this kind of thing. So I think that's the beauty. I mean, in empowerment, we always say that realization of your disempowerment helps you embark on the journey of empowerment. I think same applies here. Realization of how you were suppressed from expressing something in your childhood, whether you were a girl or you were a boy, kind of thing. So actually recollecting all that, reflecting all that, and try to sort it out in our parenting behavior, and that does happen, because I have seen many colleagues in my work, where we primarily also work with women, more on violence against women. So they defied the norms that their parents had adhered to, because they thought that their parents did not pay attention to them, did not pay heed to them when they were in distress. And so they took a position where their daughters were in distress, and they stood against everybody and stood by their family. So I think this is something which is very important. There are no lessons, there are no classroom lessons, like do this, don't do this, don't do this. But primarily we reflecting ourselves on what we speak, how we speak. Language matters so much, because language is politics, kind of. Yeah. It matters so much. So how do we use language? And it's not just textual language, it's body language. What you support and what you discard, what you ridicule, that gets expressed through your body language, and children quickly learn that. They get those messages. So I would say we have to be just very thoughtful, not careful. I would say we have to be just thoughtful in what we do. Yeah, and dialogue is the core, I think. And dialogue should be non-judgmental and non-threatening. Only then it will create space for communication and negotiation.
This is well said, Sujata ji. And I definitely think that there is a lot of creating of that space for conversation. But Avantika here actually has a question which I'd like to actually put to you right away, because I think there are a lot of, like, the millennials will say, there are woke parents who are having these conversations in the house, having a space for such conversations. But what if, people are trapped in those traditional gender roles that, the husband is out, he's working, he doesn't have time, the woman is the homemaker and a stay-at-home mom. How do you have a conversation with them? And she says that despite being raised a feminist mom, how do you let kids imbibe a different worldview, but given in that traditional setting? So any thoughts on that, Sujata ji?
Yeah, actually, I think it's the questions that you pose and deliberate on, that would be, because for my son also, I would say, when he was in first class, actually he was doing his lesson at home, and he said, father works at some place, mother works at home, she cooks, she does this. And I said, when did you see me doing that? When did you see me cooking? When did you see me? So actually you should tell, what does your mother do? So you should tell your teacher what I'm actually doing, and it is, and you can tell, or you should tell her what your father is doing. So though these kind of things, he actually didn't accept that when he was 1 year, he was in first standard, because he thought that would reduce his credit in his classroom. Because teacher will question him a lot. And again, I would say curriculum is one more thing we have to look at, because so many values get imbibed through the curriculum. What roles you assign when you are giving examples of girls and boys, even in mathematics, even everything. So that matters so much. But actually, I think the best way is digging questions out of those behaviors, what they learn, and then discussing them frequently. So on this, so that might be, but actually the onslaught from the external environment is so high. Right? So we have to struggle. And sometimes we feel, oh, have I failed as a what a good mother, gender sensitive mother? So these questions crop up, but the thing is, they don't frustrate.
Yeah. Very idea of a good mother and the illusion of that,
Yeah, yeah,
Sujata
yeah,
ji.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And sort of, I think we've answered Shobana's question by saying, how do we influence schools, right? But I think in this particular environment where everything is happening on Zoom, at least I was able to influence in the class, because most times my husband used to sit with my son, and the teacher used to keep saying, "Can you please call your mothers? I have to tell something to mother." And in fact, my son actually said, "No, my father sits with me in the class." So I think how we use the new medium that sort of pandemic has pushed to us to say, hey, let's inform that, it's not just the mother who will be sitting. Ask the mother who's cooking, what does she cook, and how do we have that conversation with the teacher
Yeah.
about that. I think we as parents can have that influence as well. But Parmesh, having woke parents is one thing, but having these conversations in workspace is completely another. So my question really to you is, how do you have these important conversations? Why is it important to do this in a workspace? And how does that trickle back into the home? And why do you think that conversation is important? And how can parents actually cultivate an inclusive and equitable outlook? So how do you think a gender equitable worldview benefits employees and colleagues, and how does it trickle back home?
Great, thanks. So I actually don't make that much difference between workplace and family. And I write in Queeristan about our offices and our workplaces actually acting in loco parentis for our employees, because a lot of people in workplaces have not had accepting families in general. We've all grown up in families in which our parents have told us to study, get good marks, and not asked us questions like, what matters to you? What is your favorite color? Who do you love? What is the meaning of life? I mean, my parents certainly didn't. They were like, you have to come out first in class or whatever, right? So I think that more so than ever in India, our workplaces need to act like good families to compensate for the bad parenting and bad families that many of us have. So I think we need to, of course, our families need to act better, but our workplaces often need to compensate. And why they need to do it is entirely in their own interest. I write again in my book about how all the data says that, I'm talking about LGBTQ, but this is for, it can be extrapolated to anything, right? Having all the data says that when you have an equitable worldview, when you create more inclusive spaces, say for LGBTQ people, for instance, the global LGBTQ economy is about $5 trillion. In India, it's about $200 billion. You have access to this. So being inclusive as an organization makes you infinitely more money because you have access to certain markets, right? The data says that when you have this inclusive, plural worldview, your organization becomes 8 times more innovative. This is Deloitte data from 2018. Not 8% or 80%, 8 times more innovative because people are able to bring their authentic selves to work, and productivity goes up, innovation goes up and all, right? Besides, of course, the actual benefits for employees themselves in actually unleashing their true potential, unburdening themselves and so on. So my recommendations actually for parents and workplace colleagues are pretty much the same. You have to walk the talk, as Sujata said earlier, right? What you say and what you do needs to be very much in sync. So I have 5 broad recommendations, which I hope everyone listens to and actually adopts. The first is, as we were saying earlier, you need to learn more. And in today's world, there's no excuse for saying, I don't know where I can learn from. Just there's so much you can read. Books, movies, you can really learn how to check your own biases, and you must learn widely and read widely. So with LGBTQ, for example, don't just read about LGBTQ urban narratives. There are so many rural narratives. Read about what it means to be queer and Dalit, queer and Muslim. There are great books. Maya Sharma's book is amazing on being lesbian and underprivileged India. There are so many incredible books. If you don't like reading, follow some accounts on Instagram, like Queer Muslim Project, Dalit Queer Project, and so on. If you don't even like Instagram, there's enough YouTube videos or whatever. But the point is, there's enough knowledge out there. You need to learn as parents and as like workplace colleagues. You need to educate yourself more, and it's free right now. It's all available out there, right? Secondly, I would say, please normalize conversations around gender and sexuality.
Yeah.
And you can use pop culture to open these conversations, right? You can say, oh, Sonam Kapoor and Anil Kapoor are playing father and son, and Anil Kapoor and Sonam is lesbian. What do you think about this? You know, you can have these conversations around dinner tables, because suddenly now there is more and more representation in mainstream media. Use it to begin the conversations in your own homes, or conversations around pronouns, vocabulary, and all of that. Use pop culture to begin these conversations at work or at home, right? I think number 3, link your own volunteering efforts to that of gender and sexuality. There are so many amazing NGOs in every city now. What if in your workplace or in your family, you start talking about how can we support these NGOs? How can we go out and reach out to them? How can we actively participate in their work? You're role modeling, right? You're walking the talk. You're saying, I'm interested and I'm participating in the conversation. 4th, do the housework. And I think this is very, very important. It's not just home. There is this concept of office housework as well. And people are realizing that even in workplaces, who book the people who book the conference rooms just naturally order tea and coffee, naturally clear up after it, tends to be women. Why? The men just think their role is to come for the meeting and walk away. Who's going to clear the coffee cups? Who's going to take the biscuits? Who's going to talk to, right? I mean, so I'm saying you can role model good behavior, because I know enough men who talk about gender equality, but are not doing housework or office work. They're leaving to their female colleagues. And your children or your office colleagues will see, right? They will say they're saying one thing, but they're doing another. So that's terrible role modeling, right? So become conscious of it and actually do this. And I would say if you're at home or if you're in the office, as a woman, I would say tell the men around you to do some of the work themselves as well. Say, hey, why don't you ask if I want coffee today, or maybe you can clear up today, or things like that. Right? I would say we need to normalize a lot of that. I think finally, we all need to be better allies. And I think that's what we need to do at home as well as more so in the workplace, right? So with LGBTQ, and again, it would translate to gender or any other dimension of inclusion. I think wherever we have power, we need to use it, right? Like Vivek used his power in incredible ways and showed what it's like to be a good ally. And because of that, right, you could create a ripple effect where Vivek, your daughter is now becoming a good ally and so on, right? So whether it's in creating communication, whether it's in giving people jobs, whether it is, if you have money, sponsoring things, whether it's in showing up at pride marches with your kids, even if you happen to be straight. I think I was on another conference and there's a big difference between being not racist and anti-racist. And when you're being not racist, it's just that you're saying, I'm not racist, it's fine. But when you're being anti-racist, you're committing yourself to actually proactively dispelling racism. So I think we need to do the same with gender advocacy. We can't just say that for me, everything is equal. We have to actively be advocates to counter gender prejudice. So whoever's listening, follow these 5 and please change the world. We should have done it yesterday.
Very well said. Very well said.
Yeah.
You have a template to change the world. I really love that, Parvesh. I think we should all have templates to do these things. And thank you so much for that. I'm going to pull back one question that one of our attendees has, and I think that hearing from you will be really important. So, when other people say, if a boy is wearing a glittery shirt or a pink, and they say, don't do this or don't do this, how do you counter that? How do you allow children to make non-gender conforming choices, and how do you support that?
Who's that for? Oh.
For you, Parvesh. Just sort of pulling back to you. Yeah.
How do you? I think you just listen. I think you also don't force. I mean, to me, if someone, if I had a child and if they happen to identify, as male, and if they want to choose blue, I also don't want to force. I don't want to say no, I'm raising you as a woke kid, please choose. I mean, I think you can also, to me, I would say let the child lead you in whichever way, right? And of course, Sujata and Vivek are much bigger experts on this. But I would say just, and if I would also say that you can't kind of if they want to feel, if they're feeling pressurized and if they want to conform for
Yeah.
what, I don't think you can shove, or we can shove our wokeness down their throats if they want to, if they feel they need to conform for a bit or whatever, right? I mean, I think that's also very cruel.
Yeah.
So
It reminds me of how the social experiment again, no, in my office, because Zephyr was there. He was this captive audience of 3-year-old boy. We bought him kitchen set and all of these things, and he went straight to his cars. And we tried our best to like say, hey, let's bake bread and let's. And he was like, just give me the cars, man. Like I really don't want. And how being woke doesn't really mean that we should just allow them to explore. But I think we'll come back to you, Parvesh, and maybe our other panelists. But it's an important conversation to have with family who don't support these choices. And how do we have that supporting environment? Because I could be woke, my child, I want to be woke, but what about those older people who want us to have the Ken and the Barbie, right? So we'll come back to that to you though. Vivek, my last actually formal question to you is around you've already told us, and I know Mishka, she's amazing. So really, family is a very powerful contributor to how children learn these norms. So how do you sort of model parenting to your children, and how do you shape their expectations of a partner in a stable and healthy relationship? So over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Anusha, and wonderful question. And before I come to that, I just had one comment on what we were speaking earlier. And I just want to say that this whole language piece, I think Sujata did speak about it, and Parmesh also did speak about it, is a very, very important aspect. And I think we need to kind of, not just in our verbal language of what we speak, I think we need to look at the fact that what is our mythology telling them? Because at least in the Indian context, mythology plays a very significant role in forming these perceptions. So what language are we using at multiple places? The whole concept of the fact that we talk about masculinity and femininity by itself is again creating biases. So how do we really start using a language which is neutral? And I mean truly neutral. A world where we talk about masculinity and femininity is not neutral. By itself, we are kind of talking about bipolar, or two binary this thing. So I think we need to do that. Now, coming to your question specifically, I think it's about, and Parmesh very beautifully touched upon it, that it's not just about the words. It's about your actions. It's about what we do. And in every possible manner, I think it plays a beautiful role. And I have a small story here to narrate. See, I mentioned about my girls being adopted. When my elder one was still, meaning was in school, early school, and we had gone to the trouble of getting the birth certificates changed to our names, because the first problem that happens is that when you submit the birth certificate to a school, the school then starts talking about saying, okay, here's an adopted child because the birth certificate has other names. So we changed that. So hence, a lot of people in the school didn't know about the fact that she was adopted. And one day she came back and told us, saying, in the lift, one girl walked up to me and asked me, her name is Riddhi, saying, Riddhi, are you adopted? And our first thought was she knew. So there was no question. Both of them knew from the fact that they were 1 year old. They went back to the orphanage. They came from to celebrate their first birthday. And that's the culture we brought them up with. So they knew from the time they could make sense. Actually, they knew even before they could make sense that they came from an orphanage. So they have fond memories of, we went to that place and we said, yeah, that place was an orphanage, which is where you came from. So they had that memory. So she immediately responded back to this other girl saying, yes, I am adopted, but do you know the difference between being adopted and naturally born? And that girl obviously responded saying, no, I don't. She says, I will tell you, your parents did not have a choice when you were born. My parents had a choice and they selected me. And she said, so this girl was obviously trying to be one up, in terms of saying that you are an adopted child and I am a naturally born child. And so beautifully, she just responded back saying, yes, I am. But do you know the difference? You are kind of forced upon your parents because you were born. Whereas in my case, my parents had a choice and they chose me and brought me home. So I think it's about the actions we take, it's about what they observe. Now your question about, what kind of expectations that we can set. So I think it's about helping them understand, that what is it that they should have as expectations, both ways, what expectations they should have from their partner, and what expectations they should be kind of be aware of that the partner is going to have of them. And I think it's important to understand that both ways, you know understand where is it, up to what point is it okay to kind of tolerate, and where is it that you need to draw a line and say, now this is becoming toxic, this is becoming something that needs attention. Because like you said earlier, sometimes beating is also seen as love. So I think it's those things that they need to understand, that this up to this point is okay. Beyond this, I think it doesn't make sense. Also, it's about where they need to stand up. I think they need to have that confidence that if there is a problem of this nature which is going beyond the point, you need to stand up. And you need to stand up, and there are going to be people. We will be there as parents with you, but beyond us, even the world is going to be with you. All that it needs is that you need to stand up. So manage that part of the expectations, and also help them understand what's healthy and what's unhealthy. Because that's also very important in the conversations, in the dialogues that we have with that. And also understand the old world, the traditional expectations, and how those are changing. Like we, in our time when we grew up, the expectations based on gender was very different than what it is today. And it's going to be very different in the world that they will grow up into. So how do they understand the whole role models and the expectations of the role that are going to be changing? But I think the most important piece is about the language, and the most important piece is about kind of practicing what you preach. And I think I loved the points that I heard earlier, that what are you doing besides just speaking? Because actions speak louder than words, as we all know. So they are watching, and the new generation is super intelligent. They are able to decipher your words and your actions, and any kind of disharmony between the two at the drop of a hat. And they know your words are your words, but your action is what really you are standing for. So it's very, very important that we have to be watchful. And I think I like the way Sujata put it, not careful but thoughtful. By thinking about it, saying, okay, what will this translate to, rather than just my words. So I think those are things that I think I have in my own way tried to play. And I think Ekta joins me in doing a lot of these things. So that's what we do to help bring up the next generation in a manner that they are able to stand up and kind of deal with these situations, because life is full of experiences that we will all have. Despite our best efforts, life is going to have its own, life will take its own turn. None of us would have expected what our lives took. So their lives will take their own turns. Thank you, Anusha.
Very true. Well said, Vivek. And words and action, I think those are really important. And like one of the young colleagues who worked with me said, words and action in real life and online both matters, because I think now that whole world is so different, and our words and actions online and offline are also quite different. But just sort of pulling back to what you said, when we what sort of conversations we need to have with the boys and the girls, and our experience through Voice for Girls has been a lot around just explaining to them the importance of consent, and why consent is important in a relationship, and what is a healthy relationship. Because like Parvesh said, Kabir Singh, I remember after seeing the Arjun Reddy, the Telugu version, and I was halfway through it, I was boiling with anger and I was in the washroom. But really what troubled me was the young women there were like, I really want a boyfriend like Arjun Reddy. And And the person that I was like, I really wanted to just sit them down and say, that's really toxic and that's a toxic relationship. And how do I explain to them toxic and a healthy relationship? But again, how much role does a parent have? How much role is Arjun Reddy or Kabir Singh having in their life? It's quite fascinating. But Sujata ji, I think, night time to bring you in to say, some of these questions are around what is the right age to talk to children about, gender and defining empowerment, and what sort of conversation should we have with them, if you can.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I wanted to say this, because when we did research on masculinity, actually, it told us that it's not enough to work with just boys or men. You have to work with women also, because the construction is really complementary. So, so you have to really make them reflect. Both the segments, you have to make them reflect. And I don't mean to be binary, I'm just aware of gender diversities, etc. But since our research was situated in kind of binary, this thing I'm just saying. So, and then the one of the observation was also that it was so difficult to change their constructs, to make them reflect on their construct, because they were deeply rooted into their upbringing and they were manifesting. So what we realized that it's important to work with boys and girls and other gender. I mean, all genders, work with all genders at much earlier age, in their formative age. So we actually worked with the children between the age group of 12 to 50 in school settings. And this was again an action research. It was called GEMS, Gender Equitable Movement in Schools, where we worked for gender sensitization with both all genders in the school, kind of. And we had a curriculum. This program went on for 2 years. It had curriculum of 2 years, and it dealt with constructs of gender, violence. We didn't say it's sexuality because the school would get offended, but then we said relationship kind of thing. And the first year we took on introducing concepts, but the second year were more on behavior. Like, just as you just said, how would you assert yourself? How would you say no without offending anybody? Kind of. You have to be really assertive, very confident. Yeah, and don't need, not necessarily you should be offending, because that's your stand and you should be firm about that. So those kind of skills, how would one get? So that actually we did in like 145 schools in Mumbai first, and then it was scaled up to 24,000 primary and upper primary schools in Maharashtra with the support of government of Maharashtra and UNICEF kind of thing. So basically, and if you ask me about the age, I would say even 12 to 14, 15 age group is not the right age to intervene into these constructs, to talk about this construct. Actually, we should go to nursery rhymes, they should be gender sensitive. It starts from there. Even 12 to 15 age group, when we did formative research, we found that the construct of boys around violence and around gender were almost identical to what we had found in young men between the age group of 16 to 24. So they get constructed at much earlier age. That's why I say normal gender sensitive nursery rhymes, and prior to that is your home, your family, where you get to know all this. I just wanted to tell you, I have a friend who works with me. So she was like roaring laughter. She was watching something on the video, WhatsApp something. And then she said, I asked her when what she was saying. So she said, look at this boy who was like, I think maybe 4 or 5 years old. And his video was there that went viral. Anything goes viral nowadays. And he was saying, I want to get married. I want to get married. And somebody was asking him, why you want to get married? I want somebody to cook for me. I want to get married. So actually, like a 5-year guy, and she was so happy to seeing him saying this, So that's the contradiction. So that's the space where we need to work more.
And Anusha, if I may add here, I think, in addition to the nursery rhymes, again, at the cost of repeating myself, I think mythology again plays a role. And I agree with Sujata, because, age doesn't matter. Subconsciously, a lot of things are going in, and I've seen that with our girls, that, even when they were very, very young, and we had the habit of reading the newspaper to them, they couldn't understand anything. But our belief was that, subconsciously something is going to really go in. And when they become conscious about these things, these things will come back, and this will become really the formative years. So I would also tend to think that, there is no age, as early as you can begin, it makes more sense. And I would also say that there is no difference about how do you speak to a boy or how do you speak to a girl. I think that also is a narrative we need to change. We just need to speak to the child.
Right.
And I think one more thing that I want to make here, when I talked about language, even the construct of the fact that, while there is the one side, which is this whole spectrum of the gender, but I'm saying that even in an individual, there is a man and there is a woman. There is a masculine side to an individual and there is a feminine side to an individual. So each of us is a father and a mother in that sense. So we have to stop kind of branding that again, in that sense that, no, you are a man. Even a man has women elements in it, and even a woman has a men element in it. So it's, the whole thing is very kind of fluid, and I know this is a very common term there, but I'm just saying we need to really keep the language also such though. So I would only react to that question saying, when do we speak to boys? I don't know boys or girls. When do we speak to our children? As early as possible.
As early as possible. That's the takeaway. Arpita, I think we've sort of answered your question, but just adding that you have a unique opportunity of having maybe a boy and a girl child at home. Unfortunately, the binaries exist right there. But my experience, in fact, having a boy and a girl sort of is allowing me to expand the universe in a very natural, organic way. Because I mean, the first thing my son asked me is, well, he doesn't have a penis. So I think the conversation started with him right there to say, yes, there is a difference, but this is only physical. But let's go into what it is. And I think modeling makes a big difference, because I see my 10-month-old daughter only going for the ball and the cars, and she leaves everything else alone. So I think it's a unique environment, Arpita, to explore these concepts at home. I'm going to have Parmesh come in. I think this is an interesting question for you. Nimisha says that she has a 6-year-old son, and he has just started realizing that girls and boys are different, but too young to really know and treat or mistreat. So how and when do we talk to him so that he knows how to treat and respect women without making it a big thing? And how naturally boys learn from media or peer pressure that they're superior, but how to go away from that. So Parvesh, maybe you have the first to get this in, and I'll invite any other panelists to answer.
So I think Vivek and Sujata have already said, like, 6 is perfectly fine to talk about, what is decent behavior in general to everyone. So I think besides talking about it, just showing that behavior would also be really, really good. And to talk about this, again, I would just always, I've had wonderful conversations with friends. In fact, there was one of my friend's daughters who, when she was 6, we had these lovely conversations about fairy tales. We were talking earlier about mythologies and fairy tales. And we had this most incredible conversation. So she's very used, because me and my partner go over. So she's very used in she's older now. I mean, but she grew up with her parents having queer friends, and sometimes friends come over who are uncle and auntie, and sometimes 2 uncles come over, and that's so in her worldview that is very normal. And so she grew up imagining that there are multiple kinds of couples in the world. But still, when we were talking about fairy tales, and for some reason she said Rapunzel was her favorite fairy tale, which I really don't like, Rapunzel. So I was like, why? I was like, can we discuss this? And people think that children are silly, but they're not. 6-year-olds are very capable of having complicated conversations with close readings of fairy tales, and they'll give you their perspectives on it. I was like, why do you like Rapunzel? And I was like, let me tell you why I don't like it. She's letting her hair down. She's waiting for some prince to come up. Why can't she rescue herself? And so we rewrote this fairy tale. We rewrote a feminist lesbian version of the fairy tale where, she doesn't need to have her hair down. She can rescue herself. She teaches herself karate by watching YouTube videos. And, maybe she doesn't need a prince and she's very happy being in love with the princess herself. So I think, I think any age is fine as long as you treat children with respect and decency.
Yeah.
And encourage them to have that side of them come out as well. And children are also, strange things come out in terms of how they socialize and what they socialize. So another story, if I may, I have another friend who's, in Michigan at this point. And when his son was, again, very young, I think around 5 or 6, he said that he wanted to wear, dresses to school. And his parents they said, of course, you must wear dresses. So they went and they bought him a dress that he chose, and he went to school and he came back. Then the first time after that, he came back very sad. And they were like, what happened? And they were like, all the boys were very okay with my dress, but the girls said that if you must wear a dress, you should make it a blue dress because he had chosen a pink dress. And they were like, all the girls told him that boys can only wear blue dresses. Girls can wear pink dresses. Of course, the parents then said, go back to them and tell them what rubbish. I can wear whatever color dress I want. But it's also interesting what kids internalize about gender. Like these kids, they had internalized the color and not really the shape of the garment. So it's kind of interesting. But I would say just, have regular conversations. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. Sometimes the pushback comes from the girls and women, and how it's important to always recognize there will be patriarchal women and feminist men, and again that's that continuum that we need to follow. So thanks for that. But just sort of coming back to the question I asked. So yes, you have parents who are more woke and more supportive, but what about the extended family, especially when boys make these non-conformative choices like wearing the pink dress, and how do you deal with family? So Parmesh, maybe you take the first stick again.
Look, ultimately it's your primary relationship with I think the only job of a parent is to love and to nurture and to support your child. And I think the child knows very much that is my parent, batting on my team, or is my parent batting on society's team, and so on. So I think if you indicate to that child that I care more about what the world thinks versus, our relationship, and, it's very clear. I think children can understand that very, 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 very well. So you can come to, I think every relationship is negotiated. So you can, with honesty, say, look, I think every family dynamic is also different. But your child needs to know that you are on their side, come what may. And then you can come up with a strategy on how to navigate other people together.
Right.
Is what I would say. Sujata and Vivek I would love to hear their, their takes on this.
Coming from activism, I would first think about how do you nurture his peers also, kind of like how would you take up these conversations with the peers? Definitely parents would support the child they love. That's unconditional kind of thing, irrespective of anything. But then also nurturing the ecosystem that our children would need is so important. Talking to people. It could be their peers, it could be their teachers, communities. Anybody that who has influence on our children. So talking to them in opening up conversations, being really non-threatening and non-judgment. You don't endorse to this means you are on that side of the table. So that doesn't work. kind of just trying to build bridges between them, because I personally believe in nearest support ecosystem, like, so we are support system for our children, but actually they should have nearest support system where they are either working, learning, or wherever, and they should be able to handle it. So that would matter much. And as I said, being activist, I immediately was thinking about how do we bring up these conversations with their friends, their parents, friends' parents, etc., teachers, or in communities. So we primarily work in low-income communities. So it is always, we think about community and how would the support come from that ecosystem, for that. And opening up dialogue and conversation, I see, is only way to build those bridges.
Okay. Vivek, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I certainly kind of endorse what both Parmesh and Sujata said, that it's about helping them recognize that it's okay to have these conversations, and we are on their side. And I can give you a classic example. My father's a doctor, he's an anatomy professor, and when Mishka, our younger daughter, started her journey of being an ally, and she started talking about it, and quite often the conversation would be where he's 80 years of age now, so and an anatomy professor, he would tend to go back to the anatomy and to the fact that there is a male and there is a female, and then she sat down and initially it was about, okay, how do I get him to understand? And then she had this conversation with us and I said, look, you are calling yourself an ally, right? Now here's a classic case for you. You have to work with your grandfather. You are an ally. And as we say, it starts from home. So if you want to be an ally, let's see how you're going to be able to work with him and get him to be an ally, get him to understand that this is beyond the physical norms that you understand. And it took 2 weeks. And thereafter, today, they have open conversations around that between the two of them. An 80-year-old and a 15-year-old have open conversations around it. So I think it's about that point that, we are with you, let it be open. It's okay to have a conversation around these topics. There is no taboo here, and there is no hush hush, and there is no shh, don't talk about it. The elders from the extended family are here. I think some of these conversations are things that we need to really open and let people understand that it's okay, and we are with you, and it's only natural and normal. There's no abnormality here. So I think that would make a big difference to
But I
extended
think
family
it also
getting
goes
involved.
back to, having that space where even they seeing their parents disagree with their parents or their elders in so many of these ways. Because I remember my mother keeps telling me, again, you've gone and cut your hair is shorter than Rohit. And I actually have to have a conversation where Sten is like, she likes to see me in long hair, but doesn't mean that, and it's okay. She's got her own ideas, but can we look at a different worldview? Again, I think it's about how many battles can you pick, and it goes straight back to what Parve said. Like, I think the children sense whose side we are on, and they sense it really early on. So I think as parents, we really need to say, hey, I'm with you no matter what choices you make, cool or uncool, and let's see where life takes us. But Amrita has a really interesting question.
Anusha, just sorry, just one more point to make here is also to get our children to understand that they have to have patience. Sometimes they also need to know that everyone is not on the same page. And if I may call, some may be a little ahead in the evolution than the others. So they need to have that patience to work with those people. Because sometimes it can't be that, okay, I know, and look at this person, he or she is talking like that. It could be out of ignorance. It could be out of whatever other reason. So it's important to also help.
But Vivek, I think you're talking like an old person, because I think the young millennials want to change yesterday. So they're like, everything has to happen right now. Fast track, fast food, everything fast. So not not sounding ageist, but you do sound, slightly old today. But coming back to, yes, the important point that you make, that change is slow, it'll take time. It's not a 2-minute Maggi noodle. But Amita has a really interesting question. She says that she runs a gender cool brand called Equal and she says that she's made a choice that, she speaks to girls and boys, but she's finding it really difficult to bring the parents of boys into this conversation. I think that's a really important point. In fact, a lot of these stories that now we start seeing is, yes, you have this Rapunzel who's reinvented herself, or, you have rebel stories for girls, which has all these girls. I'm like, why it should be rebel stories for children? Why should boys think that leaders are all kinds, but girls have to start just listening to stories. So I'm going to invite any of you who may have something to comment to what Amita says.
Yeah, actually we had tried this, bringing fathers of fathers of children into the conversation around gender. I mean, there's both boys and girls, etc. So it is, I think, it is difficult to bring in men into this conversation. It takes time because I said, one is, parents of boys also, if you say, because they think that there is no need to change anything. As for example, when we talk about girls, so we know about violence against girls. We know that she can be ill-treated at her marital home, etc. So all those thoughts are very clear. So if she becomes independent and if I do something on that, so that would be helpful. But then we don't think that boys need to change anything in their mental framework, in their behavior, etc. So that's kind of complacency, which is very selfish complacency, I would say. Very selfish thought is there. So they don't pay much attention for this transformation. And that's why I was saying, like, how much we make our children to run after competitive this thing. Talk to them about, endorse consciously, subconsciously, implicitly, explicitly, the violence that they do. Mental violence, physical violence, etc. And just don't pay any attention to that. When do we talk about compassion and love as value of life? When do we talk something beyond material gains, which is of immense importance to our life and our being? So actually, these kind of conversations, are very important. And that motivation needs to be triggered. As Vivek was saying, patience is, they wouldn't come on the first year, but we have to pursue it, because unless they come into the conversation as partners, societal picture will not change. Then we would be working in smaller pockets, like our families.
But just thanks for that, Sujata. I think Sujata ji. But Amita, it is really, really difficult to get parents of boys to come in this conversation as much as boys to come in this conversation. But I think Sujata ji has given a few tips of how to do that. So moving on, I think Deepika says that she has a 12-year-old who said when 6 to 7 is the right age to talk. Deepika, to you, I would say you have a woke child, and as a woke parent, congratulations on how you're raising her. Thank you for the question. We have Deepti again, who's asked a question around how do you have children navigate gender identities, and how do we prepare them outside the binary? I think, Deepti, we've had a lot of conversations to see how we can do that, and Parmesh has given us a 5-point agenda and a template to change our thinking. So I hope from all our panelists and what Parmesh said, we've answered that question of yours. Neelima, I think you have a very interesting question on how early on do you have children understand consent, and you were giving the example of your 13-month-old, when you're saying that, when you're asking your son to give a kiss, and if he says, no, I'm not, you believe that you should leave him alone, but your husband thinks that, it's too early and you should, allow him. To you, I would say, and I'll invite the panelists afterwards, when we we work with children on we don't call it even good touch, bad touch anymore. We call it safe and unsafe touch. We explain. I think it's really important that children, as early as it gets, to explain to them that they have a say in wanting to be hugged or wanting to be touched, and what is a safe and unsafe touch. There's really no right age to do that. But also it's about having that conversation with your husband also, to say, well, why not share his point of view, to say, yes, I want that love and I'm seeking that love from you. Whenever you're ready, you can give it to me. But I'm going to invite anybody else to sort of have a cut at answering Nilima's question. So 13-month-old, is it the right age to talk about consent?
So, Anusha, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. It may not be the right age to talk, but it is the right age to demonstrate the behavior, because that is what is going to become deep rooted as that 13-month-old child is going to grow. Because then, one is to talk about the concept of consent, and the second is to demonstrate the concept of consent. And imbibe that into the child, saying, okay, I have seen that, and like I said, the child may not understand this today, but the child will understand this 1 year later, when the child is maybe 2 years or 3 years old. And when they reflect back is when this will come back and say, oh, that is what that meant. And I have seen that from very early days in my life. So I understand the concept of consent. While I may understand the whole concept of consent when I'm 3 years old, but I will then have memories of 13-month-old where it was practiced. So I would think that, again, going back to what I said earlier, there is no age, but it's about the demonstration of your behavior, which will really make it deep rooted.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Vivek. Amita, you said that Schitt's Creek has normalized gay love for your 6-year-old, and like Parmesh said, there's lots and lots of very interesting out of the traditional mode stuff that's available, whether it's in the movies or YouTube or whatever. So thanks for sharing that. And I think we go back to what Parmesh has mentioned and maybe look up some of those. So thanks for that. Sudakshana, I think we've almost answered that same question about, how do you bring others in this conversation about creating a gender neutral environment for your children. Swapna has an interesting question. She's saying, why do we talk to a boy about respecting women? And as a panelist, shouldn't we rephrasing it as, what do we start making a boy aware about human rights for all, irrespective of sex? To you, Swapna, I think my first sort of reaction is to say it's important that we realize that we live in a world where women are not respected, and it brings focus on, yes, as a boy, or as that particular category is vulnerable and we need to show focus. But anybody has anything to say? Parmesh? Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, because I get this a lot also when I talk to people about LGBTQ rights, and there's always someone says, but why do we have to talk about LGBTQ? It's human rights or things like that, right? And I mean, to that we just have to say, but we live in a world in which certain people are treated much more unequally than other people.
Yeah.
That's why we have to talk about it. In an ideal world, if everyone was treated equally, we wouldn't have the need to talk about it. But because we live in heteronormativity, we have to say that we also want to talk about 6 to 10% of the population, which is not being treated equally. And it's the same, right? If we lived in a world in which there was gender parity and equality, then we wouldn't be saying that you need to respect. The reason we are saying you need to respect women is that because children are growing up in a world where disrespecting women is very much the norm. So that's why you have to point it out to them. That's...
Parmesh, thank you for answering the question. I think we're running short of time, but I wanted to also answer quickly, how do you make men and boys who are in position of power realize that gender equality is good for them? So from your experience, what would you say that conversation should be?
Very much by building the linkage to that gender equality and their own ability to thrive when they understand that. So I think men, and this is the thing, right? Toxic masculinity hurts everyone. So you have to make men realize that when they go on the journey of learning, unlearning, expanding their mind. They will ultimately heal themselves. So you have to make
Yeah.
linkages between. So when I talk about LGBTQ rights, now how do you get allies into the LGBTQ movement? Now, so many men are straight and they say, why do I need to be an ally? But you have to say, but there has been a time in your life where you've been treated unfairly. And in our country and all around the world, people treat each other unfairly for many things, right?
Many reasons.
Too tall, too short, too fat, too thin, too dark, too fair, too everything, and you will be treated unfairly. So you have to tell them, maybe you're not queer, but you have been treated badly for something that was no fault of yours, right? Now, can you take a cognitive leap and imagine what it must be like to be queer? Likewise, on gender. So you bring people in, you call people into the struggle by connecting with something that they have felt and say, you will never know what it's like to be me, but can we imagine? You do know what it's like to be treated badly for no reason. So here's why you need to
How do we do that?
So you will help yourself. So I think that's a really good way, because then it's not, you're not obliging them or making them feel, right?
Yeah.
So.
I think the last question is by Ekta, who says, how do we explain this concept of women who have internalized patriarchy? But like we want, sort of answer that patriarchal women and feminist men, there's a continuum, and how do we have those conversations? And Vivek will answer your question. You have a panelist right there at home with you, Ekta. So thanks for that question. And unfortunately, I don't think I have time for final comments from you, but I'm going to quickly take this chance to say, okay, imagining a feminist future, what year will you say will the feminist future arrive for us? I'm going to say 2053. So I'm going to have Sujata tell me a year, Vivek tell me a year, and Parmesh, and then we close. So Sujata.
Yeah, already we are seeing the onset.
Okay, so we are already there.
I think it will evolve.
Okay, so Parmesh.
Yeah, agree with Sujata. We are living in it. We now need to further surround ourselves with it more and more, but we are living in it.
Okay, and Vivek.
And being an eternal optimist, I'm going to say that while I agree we are living in it, I think these words that we use today will be out of our dictionary by 2030. By 2030, we will not have any of these.
I'm far beyond all of you. I'm looking at 2053. I think I need to be more optimistic here. I think the pandemic has gotten to me more than I would like to admit. But thank you so much. It's been a wonderful, wonderful evening with all of you panelists, and lovely questions that have trickled in. And I hope we see this gender, equal feminist future much earlier. So thanks for the questions. Thank you, BIC, for this, and Equal Community Foundation for this opportunity. And thank you, panelists. It's been wonderful moderating the session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Over to you, Lekha.
Superbly happy and optimistic note. While trying to come up with a title for the session, we did a lot of thinking and back and forth so as to not make the title heavy and jargon filled, that it is that it could be inaccessible to people. But today's conversation has proved that with empathy, awareness, and a touch of lightheartedness and a lot of love, all serious, difficult conversations can be made accessible. Thank you for sharing your invaluable experiences and enlightening us with this rich treasure trove of approaches and tips that parents and parent figures can dip into from time to time. This will be available on YouTube for perpetuity. The hope is that we keep coming back and learning and internalizing concept of gender equity. It's a long way to go, but this is a great place to start. Thank you, Sujata, Parmesh, Vivek, for the fantastic work that you do and for your presence today. Thank you, Anusha, for your excellent moderation and focus. Thank you, Equal Community Foundation, Project Raise, and Sahana of Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. Christina, a big thank you for putting it all together. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. Good night and see you all next time.
Yeah, sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night. Stay safe.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.